Our resident Eagles and NFL Insider John McMullen appearing via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. All right, John, let's dive right into some of the interesting news and notes of the day. Daryl Worley was traded for Torrey Smith about 35 days ago. His stay in Philadelphia has ended. Give us the details on this bizarre story that happened sometime yesterday morning and culminates today with firearms and other charges.
Yeah, it's a strange situation. The fact that he was arrested early Sunday morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, a block away from the NovaCare complex. So we still don't know what he was doing there. He obviously, he's from North Philadelphia, but he lives in South Jersey now. The Eagles began their off-season program today, so there was no need to be there yesterday. And even if he was going there to work out or something of that nature, you wouldn't think that was the case because he was under the influence of something, allegedly, according to the charges. So it's a very strange situation, but the bottom line is when the cops arrived, he was passed out in his car, and there was a gun on the passenger seat. And so from what NFL sources tell me, that was sort of the tipping point and why the Eagles acted so swiftly because of the gun charges and the fact it wasn't registered. So he's got some significant legal hurdles from there. And the Eagles took a shot on a guy who had some whispers about his habits off the field. And from a football sense, as I said, it was a home run, the trade. You get a young cornerback under his rookie deal that was very inexpensive for a $5 million receiver that they didn't want. But there's always a reason for these types of trades, and you have to ask why Carolina was willing to do it. I think we now know why Carolina was willing to do it.
Huh. Well, they lose Worley, a 23-year-old who I don't know what their plans for him were. But before we get to that, this incident occurred right around the NovaCare complex. Now, from the police report, he was what, passed out at the wheel? I mean, they just saw him kind of sitting in his vehicle?
Yeah, it was passed out at the wheel, blocking traffic at about 6 in the morning. It was at 1300 Broad and Patterson, so it's about a block away from the NovaCare complex. And they got a call. They got a 911 call, and as I said, they showed up. He was passed out, and there was a gun in the car on the passenger seat in plain sight. And when the officers tried to joust him out of his sleep, he became combative, and they had to taser him. So obviously it was an ugly situation.
John, is there something to be said about, you've got Josh Huff, who was released immediately after having the gun in his car, Daryl Worley, the gun in his car. The Eagles have come out before. I mean, there are people out there that would say, boy, they should have let them have due process. You have a gun in your car or a gun near the property, that's almost like a slam dunk, right?
Well, I'm in that camp, and I think that should be an NFL policy, not just the Eagles policy, because I think you get yourself in trouble when you try to make rash decisions. So I always believe in letting due process play itself out. In the case of these types of situations with firearms, let's be honest. And one of the reasons I do argue you should let due process play out is because there's a hypocritical nature to all these types of issues. And the bottom line is Nigel Bradham has had some firearms issues in the past, not in the NovaCare complex, but the Eagles were willing to let that play out. Why? Because he's a very good player. Why are they letting things play out with Michael Bennett, despite the fact that he's been indicted in Houston? Because he's a very good player. Josh Huff, back end of the roster. Daryl Worley, back end of the roster. The reality is guys like that aren't going to get a long leash, and if they make mistakes, Jimmy Johnson used to say to all his players, I'll treat you all fairly, but I won't treat you all the same. And he was being honest, and he said, look, guys like Michael Irvin, Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, they're always going to get more more of a longer leash, as I said. The reality is, if you're on the back end of the roster, you make a mistake like this, you're gone in 12 hours. And that's what happened to Daryl Worley.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. So, big loss. Eagles can move on without this. I mean, were they counting on this guy? What do you make now? What is the football aspect of losing this guy?
No, it's not a big loss. I mean, they were hopeful. I think it does create some issues as far as if you were looking to potentially trade Ronald Darby to get a draft pick, and I think that was on the table. You have to rethink that now. I think when you talk about that 32nd overall pick, I still think it's likely they trade down, but you would now have to put cornerback, especially nickel cornerback, on the table if somebody's there that they like. So there are some reverberations, but there was just a hope that this kid could develop into something. On paper, he was going to start as the 5th cornerback, and you generally keep 5 corners. So he was at the bottom of the depth chart. The hope was that he could show some improvement and develop into a contributor, but that was just a hope.
Yeah, one of the tweets I'm reading from your article at 97.3ESPN.com is that the Panthers traded Worley because of concern over his focus and commitment and that he liked the nightlife. So it sounds like he liked the nightlife before he was even able to get on the field for the Eagles, who started their off-season programs today.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing if you think about it. I think the exact number was 37 days. And the fact that, and I was there for his introductory press conference. He was so happy to be back in his hometown. I think in some ways it is, to be honest, a little harsh to automatically throw a 23-year-old kid who obviously made a very, very serious mistake. And that's where I throw in due process. I think we're all old enough to realize that when we were 23, we were pretty stupid. Now, we probably were never that stupid, but nonetheless, everyone who has lived to be past that age kind of realizes we weren't the smartest back then. We didn't make always the best decisions. So we'll see how this plays out. His bail was $25,000. Ultimately, I think he'll get another chance somewhere in the NFL, and it's a shame that he made this mistake, and obviously it cost him his job for now, and hopefully he'll learn from it.
John, does cutting Worley affect the Eagles' draft strategy maybe in the 4th and 5th round? You know, Jalen Mills, Rasul Douglas, they were not high draft picks.
No, Jalen was a 7th-round pick and obviously developed very, very well to becoming a Pro Bowl alternate and is probably the best cornerback on this team as we stand today, although the hope is Sidney Jones will quickly surpass him. And Rasul was a 3rd-round pick. Yeah, I mean, you can never have enough corners in this league, and we've already talked about the loss of Patrick Robinson. You never really had Daryl Worley, so you're not going to know what it's like to lose him from a football perspective. But at some point, they'll add a body, and as I said, if they really, really like a slot corner, Jair Alexander is one you should keep your eye on. I can now see that in play if they stay at 32.
Sports Bash here with John McMullen. Talking a little Eagles strategy as far as the draft goes. Daryl Worley over the weekend. And then, John, we hear about Nick Foles coming out saying he still wants to be a starter. Do those words surprise you that somebody – it almost seemed like he was trying to ride the fence and not have those words come out on tape or on the record, but out they came.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's surprising at all. Obviously, he wants to be a starter in this league. Anyone to get into the position he's in, and you know, he's coming off a Super Bowl win. He's had a lot of success in this league, documented with 27-2 and the 7-touchdown game. I mean, to get to that position to begin with, you have to be competitive. You have to be competitive to be a professional athlete. So Obviously, he wants to be a starting quarterback in this league, but the thing that the Eagles have always tried to spin, and it's true, is that Nick Foles is a great teammate, and he believes in not creating waves. And from that standpoint, the Eagles are very comfortable moving forward if they have to, keeping him around as a backup. But 1,700 miles away, while he was in Austin, he did a TV interview. He finally admitted, yeah, I'd like to be a starter. I think everybody knew that, but those are the first times the words actually came out of his mouth.
Yeah, and one of the things that he basically, now, everybody says, yeah, I'd like to be a starter in this league, but you really look at it, he did say, I look forward to Carson coming back and assuming my role. I mean, that's not to say, hey, I have one more year left here. I know my role, but maybe when my contract's up, I would entrepreneur an opportunity to go start.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that Nick Foles isn't going to create waves. There's not going to be any issues as far as trying to force the issue, as trying to say I should be in competition to be the starter here. None of that is going to happen. What is going to happen is that behind the scenes, and it probably already has happened, and you can tell by the way Howie Roseman has spoken and Doug Peterson, and Nick has said he's very close to them, and they've been kind enough to put him into the decision-making. He's said that he wants to be a starter and would probably like to be moved and given that opportunity, but the Eagles aren't just going to give him away. So basically, we're in the same place we have been. The only exception is now Nick is on the record admitting he wants to be a starter, which, again, anybody with any common sense already knew.
Well, that's where it gets a little, interesting, is that for a while it was just, Nick, the feeling, not the feeling, I guess the perception is Nick loves his role. He's happy just being the backup. He won his MVP. He loves the city and everything's fine. And then finally he comes out and says it and people try to start something.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if they're being, I mean, fans are fans, and they're going to be that way, and they're going to think, well, why would you want to leave? We saw some of the same kind of things when John DeFilippo left. And when I tried to explain why he wasn't going to stay in Philadelphia, no matter what they did, because he wanted to be a play caller. And people would say, no, he would stay here if the Eagles elevated him to offensive coordinator. No, I mean, people want to move forward in their career. That's how it works. And Nick's like everybody else. He's a really good teammate. He's going to do his job, and he's going to do it in a professional fashion. And as I said, he's not going to create any waves. But if he had his druthers, he'd be a starting quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, he certainly. Do you think there's a shot on draft day that the Eagles get calls, or do you think that ship has sailed?
I think there's a shot. I saw one interesting thought process that the Buffalo Bills could still try to trade for Nick Foles and spin off A.J. McCarron to be the backup here. I think that's pie in the sky. I think it's very unlikely. I think it's more likely in August if an injury crops up, similar to what happened with Sam Bradford, and even that's unlikely. I think in a lot of ways, and I've said it a number of times, because this is the very rare year where there were tons of options on the quarterback market. Usually there's none. We look at, there's nobody as a free agent, nobody of any substance at least. And as far as the draft goes, you might have 2 or 3 guys. And this year you had a number of options on the free agent market, and you might have 6 first-round talents in the draft. I think that really hurt the market for Nick Foles, and because of that market, I think, to be honest, Howie Roseman overvalued him a little bit.
All right, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Check out all of John's coverage of the Daryl Worley situation at 97.3ESPN.com, and also his piece on Nick Foles. who did speak to a Texas television station.
Looked like he'd known that guy for a long time, Mike Gill. Like,
he seemed very comfortable in that setting.
I don't know if it was at his house or if it was at his church, but it definitely looked like it was somebody that he'd known for a long time. He trusted his guard was down a little bit. And not that Nick Foles doesn't give straight answers when you normally talk to him with the Philadelphia assembled media, but this one-on-one looked like he really knew the guy.
And by the way, real quick, guys, the starting quarterback, Carson Wentz, will talk to the media tomorrow.
How about that?
How about that?
All right. Anything newsworthy or of substance today at the opening of the off-season workouts?
Well, I'd like to tell you, but we weren't allowed in.
So. Barred.
But we will be tomorrow. So Carson's scheduled to speak, Zach Ertz, Malcolm Jenkins, and maybe another player or two.
All right.
But obviously, Carson Wentz will be the lead because we're all going to be very interested in his rehab from the ACL and the LCL. Obviously not going to be ready for on-field work in the off-season, but he's getting better and better. You've seen some videos on Instagram and things like that. And we'll see how he's feeling.
All right. We'll have the details tomorrow right here on the Sports Bash. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.